Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Great to see so many of you. Art Basel Conversations. This is the final conversation for today. There's more talks tomorrow, so come back tomorrow. Today, for our collector talk, we're doing one called Starting a Collection. We'll get valuable insights from people at different levels of the collecting experience. I'm very happy to welcome Tom Kümmeke, emerging collector based in Zurich. And, well, maybe being a collector is also like being a curator. Anyway, Sigg, a very well-respected, well-known patron and leading collector of Chinese contemporary art based here in Switzerland. And moderating today is Amy Binding, editor-in-chief of Independent Collectors Berlin. Join me in welcoming all of them. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. So I think I'll just jump straight in and start asking some questions. And I think I would actually like to begin at the beginning. What were your aims when you were both beginning collecting? Uli, I know that you were collecting before you actually started collecting Chinese contemporary art. So maybe you can just begin to tell us what were your aims when you made that change, and also possibly have they changed since the very beginning?
I started to collect Chinese contemporary art because professionally I had to go to China, but was totally ignorant, and I hoped through Chinese contemporary art I could gain another access to China, Chinese culture. But at first I was disappointed, to tell the truth. Disappointed because the art was very derivative from Western art. I was looking with a Western eye, and I was interested in the forefront of contemporary art in the West, and I couldn't find any of that, so I didn't collect. I continued to watch it and study it, but didn't collect. And then in the 90s, I did start to look around with the purpose to collect some works, and doing that, I saw that nobody was in any systematic way collecting Chinese contemporary art. So I changed my focus to what before had been my very personal taste, to collecting like an institution would, like a national museum ought to, but did not. So I, did a kind of a pivot in the middle, and then I start to mirror Chinese contemporary art across all media, and along the timeline, maybe not as a private collector, normally does.
And how did you begin, Tom?
Well, I'm of course a few years younger than Uli, but when I would say 25 years ago, when I still was very young, I was very much intrigued by arts as such. I had arts at major. I thought I would study architecture, but at the end I did not. So maybe it was a venture that I wanted to go, maybe in my inner soul that I wanted to go into that direction. But my family said, no, you should do something stable, something serious. So I did not become an artist or weather architect. And therefore I painted in the beginning. All sorts of media, like acrylic, oil, sketching, drawings, all sorts of things. And then I was born in Düsseldorf. So in Düsseldorf there's of course the Kunstakademie, where I made friendships with lots of artists, and by those friendships I started to buy the first pieces.
And back to this, you just mentioned about collecting for personal taste. In 2012, you donated 1,500 pieces to the M+ Museum from 350 artists, which is just amazing. I mean, really fantastic. But what was it like after you stopped collecting as an institution and then started collecting from personal taste? What was that shift like?
I was roughly where I was before I started to collect like an institution. actually for very long I did not perceive myself to be a collector. You know, I had some art and I was buying some more art, but that does not yet make you a collector, I thought. So later, yes, I became one by accident, and now I have no need to collect as I did in such a broad way, acquire works which I personally may not even like, but they have a place in such a document, as I called the collection. So now I can again follow my very personal taste, and I buy very young art, and very often I get involved in maybe the creative process with some of the artists who like to do that, or commission works. So I have a fairly broad practice.
And would you say that you find it more interesting now to have this personal attachment to the artworks that you collect, whereas before it was to collect as an institution?
I didn't acoustically get the first part of your question.
I completely forgot it. No, yeah, is it so for you now, is it important for you to really love an artwork when you buy it rather than before? I think you said that you also bought artworks that you weren't particularly even fond of, but you just wanted to make sure that you covered everything.
No, now no need to cover everything. You know, love is a big word. Love is a very strong emotion. I may collect a work where I may not have such type of emotion, but a deep interest intellectually, or there are many reasons. It may surprise me, which is very important. It may take me somewhere I couldn't go myself. So these types of artworks I'm looking for.
And what about you, Tom? When you're buying works, do you look for this personal taste or connection? Because you come from a background of in investment, so does this somehow play a role when you're collecting?
Yeah, I'm right now smiling because I was thinking about how many banks or funds try to set up a successful art fund, and I have to say that will, in my eyes, never work, because art is something emotional. Art is a relationship with the artist, and I agree with Uli saying that it's the best pleasure, but also satisfaction if you can develop something together with an artist. So commissioning artworks, I mean, my resources are limited, and I also wouldn't consider myself an art collector. But through my, let's say, not history, but through my relations in the past, I have been able to also give at least benchmarks to artists of what talent I saw in them and what talent I wanted to support.
I think it's really interesting that both of you didn't or don't see yourself as art collectors. And why do you think that the word art collector is quite difficult to navigate around? For both of you, actually. Maybe you could say why you don't feel like an art collector and...
Well, it's a bit difficult because I just think that this word is so presumptuous that it gives kind of a glamour effect to a position or to a person that I'm not striving for. So actually I was a bit astonished when the Art Basel asked me, because first of all, I'm not a global patron, and second of all, I don't have a museum, and third of all, I'm also not the most vivid art buyer here with lots of gallerists, and I'm also not on any or on every gallery dinner here invited. So what makes an art collector? I mean, I don't call myself an art collector. I just like to buy and to collaborate with artists on art for the given reasons. An art collector, somebody told me, an art collector is somebody who rents space to hang his works that don't fit at home or in the office anymore. So maybe that describes it a bit.
What about you, Willie?
I didn't see myself as a collector for a long time because I did, as most people do, acquire some artworks, which I did like, and I had them in my home, and then there were a bit more. But I think to be perceived as a collector, or at least what I perceive as a collector, you have to go a step further than accumulate artworks, as I did for long. You have to, in order to not merely accumulate works, define a focus. I think that defining a focus may be the most important step if one intends to go into collecting. A focus meaning a idea, a concept, which sort of brings the works together around something. Then the works can sort of leverage themselves up and create more meaning. And so if I enter a room or a collection, I immediately can feel if there is such an idea or not. This is not a value judgment because it's up to everyone how to acquire art. But for me, this is the distinction from accumulating works to being called a collector, to make it very simple.
And talking about the focus, I think you once said that good collecting is no doubt a skill. Perhaps you could talk more about how do you get this skill? Is it something that you can learn, or you just born with it, or what is this skill?
I don't see why you could not learn this by attentively watching, reading, walking around, looking. To be a good collector or to be an excellent collector may take more than that, may take also instinct, more knowledge, may take also analytical skills. I think many people cannot differentiate between a good and a bad work. That's a very basic skill you need to have, in my view, to be a collector. It's already much more difficult to define to discern between a good and a very good work. And I think the best collectors are able to discern the very best of what's available to them at the given time. Of course, when we look at collections, we would have to know a lot more than just what we see. We would know what kind of research has been done or not done. We would know what has been available to this collector at a given time. We would need to know what is there beyond what we see. We would need to know, all the corpses in the cellar. We would need to know a lot to come to a final judgment. Who's a good collector, who's not. And of course, a lot of people just assemble masterpieces, maybe the front pages of auction catalogs, whatever. I don't think that makes you yet a good collector. I think I was talking about the focus. If I would go one step further, what I would want to see in a very good collector would be a kind of web being built by the works. It's not about lining up masterpieces, like pearls. Of course, you need some masterpieces, but very often maybe the artists that are considered second or third tier at the given moment may add works that may explain or create the context for these so-called masterpieces. And you just look at an auction catalog, 15 years old, there's nothing older and more outdated than this auction catalog. Half of the people we already forgot. It's amazing to make this experiment, in fact. So it's more than just lining up masterpieces.
And Tom, are you aware of thinking about what type of collector approach you want to take?
Actually, once you asked the question to Uli, I thought about it, and I also agree that the masterpieces that you line up, I wouldn't go for that. I mean, first of all, I couldn't afford it, and second of all, I wouldn't see them as very inspirational. So I think, answering your question, I would think, I always look with the eyes. I think what makes a good collector is a good eye. I don't claim that I do have that, but also to discover a certain innovativeness in a work. So to discover today what of living artists has or is a good quality in a difference to all the competitors, because it's a very tough market for the young artists to kind of make a USP today.
And Uli, you wrote a typology of collecting where you listed the different types of collectors in your eyes. Perhaps you could give us some more insight into this and the different categories that you divided them to.
You refer to what I call the typology of collecting.
Yeah.
Well, I talked about some of that. I think, as I said earlier on, first you start to accumulate works. Everyone starts like that. They are kept together by a personal taste, or what we think is taste, and that may change over time, and then that's a first phase. And then I think, also what I said earlier, then comes a step for some of these people who accumulate works, and in my personal view, that makes them a collector by defining a focus of some type. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be matches, it can be anything, but there must be a concept there, an idea which is a bracket around whatever a person accumulates. As I said, that would sort of level up works, create context, etc. And then, of course, there are many variants. I mean, there's the status collector. We talked about that also, where you go for the big pieces and you have the money to do that. There is the investment, collecting for investment. Also, it's perfectly okay. I don't make a value judgment on any of this. These are personal decisions. Who are we to make a value judgment on all of this? It's very clear what an investment collector is. I mean, it will go for growth of the assets. It's another way. And I also briefly talked what I called like the web collecting, which I find is the most interesting concept, where you have a focus, but then you start to weave these works. I don't want to repeat myself, more or less in the way I have been describing, to weave a dense context. So these masterpieces, if they are there, or whatever the works, they create sense. So very briefly, that would be how I see what you may call a progression in collecting.
And obviously, being a collector, part of that, or something that comes with that, is also having it in your home and living with it on a day-to-day basis. And I want to know, what's it like to live with artwork every day? Is it challenging? What are the problems with having artwork in your home? I know, Tom, earlier you told me that having artwork in your home when you've got young children can potentially be disastrous, especially when it's like work on the floor. So maybe you could talk to me about, both of you, about living with art every day.
Well, I mean, outside we see the Albawai installation with the different porcelain cups. So my kids are 7 and 9, and you can imagine that would be wonderful to use as Lego, but probably that was not in the meaning and in the sense of the artist. So therefore, you need space for collecting sculptures or installations. Therefore, we today mostly have artworks that we can hang, like oil, acryl, drawings, multiples, prints. But as I said before to you, I, for example, like the works of Alicia Quade a lot. I think you need a few sculptures to make also a nice nice surrounding. But fortunately, we do develop, or I'm involved in also developing real estate, and for a certain, let's say, target group in other kind of homes or real estate projects, that is possible that I can live to that, to such piece of arts as well.
And Uli, living with art.
Of course, I like art. I want to have it around me. As you may know, China is about size. Chinese artists' work are getting ever bigger and bigger and bigger. They do not have concerns like, where is it going to stay? What will a collector do to resolve these issues? So I live on a small island and I have a bridge, and the artworks have to be able to pass this bridge, for instance, and they have to pass through an old house door, and they have to go into spacious but not very spacious rooms. So that's already a constraint what I can have in my home. Then, of course, I have many visitors. I also have like Chinese officials, etc. So I have to take some precaution what I put in my house, particularly in areas where anyone or guests will stay. So a number of criteria I have to watch out. I also have to find agreement with my wife, whatever is in the house, not what I collect, but what I bring in the house. And then, there are many works, like I have a fat pillar of human fat, 4 meters. You may not want that in your own home.
Where is it now? Is it in your home? No.
No, it's not in my home. But I could go on with a number of works which you don't have or you don't want in your home, but they have been very important pieces because I was trying to write the storyline of contemporary art from day one to today, Chinese contemporary art. So these are works, I will not take into my home.
And how has it changed your lives collecting? You've obviously travelled around to Asia, and obviously going to art fairs and galleries. What impact has it had on you? Both of you.
Well, I think it makes life way more pleasant. There's always the challenge to combine family, art, work, other hobbies, sports. There's lots of things going on. And at the end of the day, it's also about focus, because if you don't focus, you will not achieve anything in all of them. So I try to combine often things. Since I'm not employed, but more, let's say, my own boss, I can combine business trips to Düsseldorf or to Warsaw or to Basel, although today is a Sunday, and also to the US, where I will spend the summer in Brooklyn with the family and with the kids. So I think this is also one of the advantages of today, that, let's say, the way of working has been changed over the last decade through internet, and also buying art has changed. You could buy art online, what I'm usually not doing, but how has it changed life? Again, for the pleasantful, and being member of clubs and going to fairs, that has changed my life for the time spent and for the experiences.
It may not have changed my life so much, but certainly changed me. It changed me in different ways. One is, of course, it really frees up your thinking. In particular, if you may not live within the cultural world, you may live within clearly defined limits, and how to think beyond these limits. Also, I learned a lot about thinking itself. In intense communication with artists, you may not have to collect for this purpose, but collecting leads to the same result. I claim I can think more logical than most artists. So we don't want to follow just logical thinking, which we do in our business world or in a common world we all share. But say in my interaction with artists, you make experiences about other ways going about the life. Some people don't need this, but for me it was very enriching. And in my particular case, accessing China by meeting some probably 2,000 artists over 40 years, it has given me a very deep insight into China, Chinese culture, Chinese people, which otherwise would not have. And I can see that with my business peers or other people I interact, they lack such kind of experience.
And Tom, you just mentioned about the internet and using it as a way to find artists and do some research. How do you go about finding artists? Do you use it to research, or is it more as a way to buy art online, or?
I mean, I think things have changed. You can see, most of the artworks today online through Artinet, through Artnet, through Artsy, I think it's called. And the galleries, of course, also display the art pieces of the artists. That hasn't been so much in vogue 20 years ago, of course. And you can, as I said, buy art, to name a few, multiples, or such a gallery has a quite large collection where they also use artificial intelligence or virtual reality, let's say, to place arts that you maybe find on the internet in your own home. So that helps, especially for imagination, to kind of imagine that art piece in your own space. I think that might help. It maybe would encourage you to then visit the art, or would encourage me to visit the gallery or the artist, but I wouldn't do the purchase online. But for sourcing, that of course is today, I think, a great resource. In the past, I rather went to open days of art academies, or through the network of other art lovers. We shared about artists and invited artists to home, and then he met other friends. So that's how we did it.
And I think, Uli, you once said that the internet shines light into the darkest corners of the art world. If it was possible to have had the internet as accessible as when you started collecting, how would it have changed your method of collecting? Because you are so heavily based on research and in like real life connection. What impact would it have had?
It may not have changed my own collecting so much, but everyone else's, because I had a lot of insights other people couldn't gather. I had to travel around professionally in China. There were no books at the time. There were no galleries at the time. So you really had to go there. And I also created an art award in order to gather a lot of material, which otherwise one would not have. So in this totally intransparent situation, I had an edge. In the open internet world, I don't have the same edge.
So do you think it's a bit harder now for emerging collectors to find this edge and to find this niche?
No, I think it's easier for everyone, with the internet, because everyone has access to everything, almost everything. Of course, it compresses time. It means that in collecting today, you have to decide so much faster than you had in the past. They are not giving you much time out there. If you want to buy something, you want to reserve it, you want to think, they may give you another hour or another 2 hours. So this is a phenomenon fairly recent, which comes with this enormous growth of the market and many other things. And it all is fueled by very rich information about everything. Still, someone has to edit it for you. Either it's yourself or it's people like you who do this to make something out of this wealth of information. But actually, so many more people could do the same now, and they couldn't in the past.
When do you think your collections will be finished? And will the collection ever be complete? How do you know?
Well, I haven't unlearned yet to collect, so I don't really know. Yeah, maybe you know.
Well, I don't know, but as I said, I'm not considering myself an art collector, so maybe one day I would. It's not that it's a goal, but definitely from the biological standpoint, I do have a few years to hopefully go on.
Where do you normally find out about artworks? Do you work with art advisors, gallerists? Tom?
Well, for this project last year, where we purchased around 250 artworks in Warsaw, that's not our home market. I've been there already 10 years ago, but I mean, so much is happening in such a market. We first approached galleries, but then to have an overall concept and to choose contemporary artists that also match each other for such a project, we went along with the artist, an art advisor with a local Polish art advisor, and it also went out well because at the end of the day, organizing the whole hanging and the insurance and all of that is otherwise or can be quite tiresome and involves lots of time then otherwise. For my own, I don't work with any art advisor so far.
And my final question is, what tips or advice would you give emerging art collectors, or maybe even someone that hasn't ever bought a piece? How would you influence or give them tips to find a niche or to go out there and buy their first artwork?
Well, the conventional advice I can give is you must inform yourself. You go out there, you walk through Art Basel, give you a taste of what there is, and then there are the museums, give you a taste of something else also there. And maybe you read, you have magazines, you take a vacation, you go see the institutions, and you also must see a lot of bad art. I personally think I love bad art as well, because only then you can shape your own judgment. So there's a lot one can do. And then, there is also, if you have a certain openness, then there are lots of incidents and accidents and coincidences. Like my first artwork I bought because a friend of mine went bankrupt. So in order to help him, I bought an artwork. My second artwork I bought because I just couldn't get access. I was very young, like 26, 7, to abstract art. So I thought the best way is I buy an abstract work and hang it in my room, and then maybe I develop a feeling. So actually it was in Art Basel, and one of the first ones, I bought a small abstract painting. Someone had pinched a hole into that painting, so it was very cheap. So it still could fulfill the purpose, I gave it to get accustomed to abstract work. So there are such maybe incidents that will, help you getting into collecting.
Do you think you're actually still learning about art and collecting, even now?
Of course, about art every day. I mean, there's every day new art produced, new media, new ideas, at least say new forms or new ways to express things. It would be very arrogant to say, no, there's nothing to be learned. Collecting, I think I have seen a lot and heard a lot and visited many, many collections. So the basics remain the same, while art is always changing.
Do you think that collecting has reached its peak in terms of fame and status? I mean, there is so much about collecting now, which is there's like, all these interviews everywhere with collectors and top 10 this and top 5. Do you think it's reached its peak?
I don't think, because there are so many ways to interact with art. Collecting is only one of many, and we see these cathedrals of our time, the big museums. You take a Tate, you take a MoMA. I mean, they draw 6-8 million a year. So obviously it's a growth industry. And in Asia, it only begins because in many countries, people are not yet exposed to contemporary art. They look at traditional art, or they look at, say, antiques, but they have not yet been acquainted to contemporary art. So, in particular in these countries, insofar as censorship doesn't, restrict too many things, we will have a lot of growth. In attention for art, will it all evolve into collecting? Some, yes.
And Tom, do you have any tips or advice for young collectors?
Well, it's good for young collectors to have maybe not advisors, but to have people that support them or take them around, take them to an art fair. So I always had that. I had older art aficionados that took me along the art fair, or also some, let's say, professional art advisors that I knew, but also artists. It's also interesting to go with an artist over at a fair, what I was always support, because they also see other art pieces way different than the usual art or art exhibition guest would do. As Uli said, there's lots of material out there, whether it's online or offline. There are lots of great print magazines. The internet is very resourceful in all languages. And I also would suggest that if you want to dig deeper into art, if you live in nearby an art center, whether it's Madrid or Basel or Zurich or Düsseldorf or other cities, there's usually a museum. If you like contemporary art, then go to the museum, become a donator or a sponsor, and they do usually also nice art travels. I think that's also can be quite a good way of meeting and visiting ateliers, exhibitions, other collections, and then you see what you like and maybe also find your own way, your own niche, hopefully.
Also, I think institutions can do a lot, to promote this process, because the hurdles are getting higher, not necessarily lower, to access contemporary art. Many artists make our life very difficult. And a lot of conceptual art, may show us the tip 3% of a thought, and how will a public without information ever figure all this out? Sometimes I think maybe it's better they would write an article or something, and it's not yet a visual artwork. So I think we need information. We need much information in the institutions. And I had many fights, say, with curators. I did many exhibitions, some co-curate, whatever. And to add information, in my view, is so important, to lower that barrier to a public. But even artists very often feel that they restrain the thinking of an audience by giving information. Personally, I don't believe in this.
It's really interesting because, art should be publicly accessible, and everyone should be able to engage with it. And I completely agree on that note. Yeah, so I think that's everything I have to say. Thank you so much. I think we have some time for questions as well. If anyone has any questions.
First of all, as an artist, we live as artists with art. It's really gorgeous that you live also with art. You collect art. I have a question because with my collectors, I have relationships Mr. Sigg, you said you interact with the Chinese artists. Do you both think it's more than a relationship, a friendship? Because a colleague of mine told me that he thinks it's dangerous to have a friend as a collector, as an artist, a friend as a collector, because you can change your style, and how do you manage it? That's my first question. And the second one, in Vienna we had beside Leopold, who already died, Karl-Heinz Essel, and his company went bankrupt, sorry. And the art scene criticized afterwards his death. Also, he's still alive, but he was really criticized because of his collection, that he didn't earn the big masterpieces, like you said, and that he also dumped the prices. And I think that was very unfair because he was, for the art scene in Austria, really, really very important. So.
Of course, some collectors build a power base in their interaction with artists, and they may be able to negotiate or talk with an artist rather top-down than amongst equals. But say in the Western system, normally you have a gallery between the artist and the collector, and many collectors may never encounter an artist because they may not go to galleries or they may not have the opportunity to meet artists. So the system, provides certain ups or certain pros and cons in relationships. Personally, as I tried to explain, for me the relationships are very important, but my goal was not so much to build the collection, but to access the Chinese culture, and that may go for many other people. A friendship or interaction with an artist may just enlarge, our worldview or whatever. So it may be different for an art critic. Of course, there is a theory that the art critic should not at all communicate with an artist, or ideally not even know, in order not to be somehow preoccupied with friendship or personal judgment, etc. There are different schools. But personally, I don't see a problem there. Now, how could that possibly impact the artist's work? Is yet another topic you were also referring to. I think the best artists, they just research their thing. Nobody can bring them off the track. But yes, maybe the fourth and fifth best artists, they may cater to a market or to a collector, or they may, orient themselves to other things than an inner impulse. So there is all of that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sigg, in the beginning you said, you were interested in also the Chinese art because an institution should have collected. And of course, several times the institutions were mentioned. So what is different that when an institution collects as compared to a private person? Is there a transition between the two or no difference?
Of course, there are also private institutions, but I understand your question. Say, in my case, talking about China, but not only China, we could also talk about other Asian countries. The official or publicly owned institutions simply stayed away from contemporary art. So no collection exists in these public museums. Like in China, there's simply no collection where you could, as I said earlier, read the storyline of contemporary art because of censorship, because of financial reasons, because officials simply cannot buy such type of art without, being seriously affected in their career. So there may be a million reasons why these institutions don't do what we think they ought to do. That problem doesn't exist in Europe, I think. So if I collect as an institution, then I meant It's all about representing the width and depth of art creation of a nation. If I'm a private collector, I have no responsibility whatsoever, at least for very long. Maybe, say in my case, if I in the end accumulate so much that it becomes substantial for like Chinese culture, then probably you grow into some kind of responsibility, but that's more the exception, I think. So the difference can also be explained. We look at some private institutions, then the institution is actually hostage to the taste of that particular owner or donor. You know, you may be lucky and it's an informed individual, or we may in some cases have bad luck and there may be a lot of funds, but a very poor collection. And then there may be something in between, like in the case of Basel. So all these exist.
Thank you. Just a short question from me. You talked a lot about good and bad artwork. So how would you differentiate between good and bad artwork for your collection?
Well, it's always a personal taste, but as a brief answer, bad I personally would consider very decorative art that maybe comes close to a very highlighting or flashy poster, but seeing it that if you take such a poster and over-exaggerate it, you are maybe already in a direction of pop art that also can be good art. So I think it's a very thin line to say good art and bad art.
It's probably my fault and very thoughtless. Normally I talk about meaningful and less meaningful art. That's my normal vocabulary, because I agree with you, it's kind of arrogant to say this is bad art, this is good art. But we may all agree something may be more meaningful, something may be less meaningful. But I think what's then meaningful art is probably what I said earlier, what is valid for me. The artist must take me somewhere I cannot go on my own. If an artist can do that, then for me already it's meaningful art. And then of course we have all the knowledge, or some knowledge, or however much knowledge about art. So we can situate something. Does it have an innovative character, or has it been researched all along? Has it been done many times? Is it that cycle that is recurring as much of today's contemporary art? I have the bad luck to be so old that I see many things coming back. Even in China, I see a lot of things, that now within 40 years have been done earlier, and then someone maybe with less knowledge of the art history of that particular place may just not know about this and is overly excited about something. So all these things exist, but we shouldn't talk about good and bad art. I agree with you.
Any more questions? Well, thank you very much, Tom and Uli. It was great talking to you. And thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And have a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you.